Hello, everyone. How are you doing? And welcome to another episode of the Dr. Will Show, where we have the discussions that inform, entertain, and empower educators to be the change. I'm your host, Dr. Will, and I'm here today with Michael Horn. How are you doing, Michael?
I'm good. It's good to be with you.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you again for being a guest on the show. Uh, you are a legend, and you you
You're
decided,
I think.
you decided to hang out with simple old me. So today we're going to be talking about the disruption of blended learning. I've been on this journey because our school district rolled out blended learning initiative with uh, about four different one-to-one Chromebook sites. And as an instructional technologist working with teachers, this has been sort of the crux of what I've been doing, and part of my headache is getting teachers to sort of drop that paper, not completely, but not that paper be their go-to, and using the technology to do all sorts of things. So, for those who are watching the show, will you please introduce yourself?
Sure thing. You already said Michael Horn. I don't think I go by legend, but would love to aspire to it one day. But founded the Clayton Christensen Institute about 10 years ago, which is a nonprofit think tank focused on using theories of disruptive innovation to improve education and other social sector problems. Wrote the book Disrupting Class, then blended. Left the Christensen Institute full time about a year and a half ago. Still hang out there about a day a week. But on my own now, spend a lot of time with a group called Entangled Ventures and Entangled Solutions. That is an ed tech studio helping incubate solutions for educators. And then spend the rest of my time sort of with a range of groups in board and advisory board roles. But really, the way I think about my role is I'm trying to create a future that empowers every single child to find and build their passion and realize their full potential. That's my mission, and everything I do is around that.
Cool. So let's begin by defining disruption innovation and its impact on K through 12 education.
Yeah, absolutely. So disruptive innovation means a lot of things when people first hear it. What we mean by the term is this theory that helps explain how things that are complicated, expensive, deeply centralized, and inaccessible, and therefore can only serve a limited few, how those things are transformed into things that are far more affordable, convenient, accessible, simple, such that many more people have access to them. Classic example is, think about, before 1975, if you wanted to do computing, you had to go to a mainframe computing center, have someone else run the computing task to you. Then late 70s, early 80s, personal computers came out, all of a sudden brought the benefits of computing to our fingertips, and all of us had access to computers far more affordably. Smartphones, of course, now disruptive relative to laptops and computers. So you see this process occur. Disruptions tend to start as primitive, and they get better over time. Now, as you think about K-12 education, this was challenging to apply the theory initially, but what we realized is that we're not seeing disruptive innovation of schools, right? At least in the United States. Schools are here, they're fully available to people, they're free essentially because they're public. But within schools, you see lots of areas where students don't have access to certain educational opportunities. Classic place to disrupt the classroom as we know it and use technology to deliver experiences they never otherwise would have had. And the way I ultimately think about it is that we're trying to use that technology with teachers to deliver the type of experience that only a tutor could provide in the past. And the majority of us just couldn't afford a tutor to have for our entire schooling. So that's really the goal of this, if you will.
Excellent. So now it seems as though every student has a smartphone, and more schools are launching BYOD or one-to-one programs, yet the majority of schools still operate with a standardized curriculum.
Yeah.
How can schools move towards a more personalized learning? But is this even possible, since the state departments, for the most part, are using this normative end of the year assessment as what they would grade a school to being successful?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I think there's some let's start with the regulatory thing, and then let's talk about schools. So with regards to regulation, there's no question that the assumption that everyone should be on this unit based on your date of manufacture and we're going to test you accordingly, it makes no sense because we all come in with lots of different background experiences, abilities to learn and so forth. And what we ought to be doing is measuring the growth of each child relative to their own, their own starting point, not say everyone has to be here today, period, right? I think we're starting to see some loosening of that. More and more states are experimenting with growth models to actually look at the individual growth of a student. With adaptive assessments coming on the scene, I think we can more and more think about how do we move to where we need to assess you as a learner, not you based on sort of some mythical average of where you should be. So I think we're starting to see some movement on that front. Now it's tricky because ultimately, I think what you alluded to is we shouldn't be having a mass standardized assessment at the end of the year. What we ought to be doing is, as you're learning, you're constantly being assessed to figure out, do you understand this? If so, you can move on once you show mastery. And if not, the assessment helps give the educator feedback to help understand what the student should be doing next. And maybe even empowering, ideally, the learner to help make those decisions as well over time. We're not there yet by any means, and state policy and federal policy haven't gone that far, but I think the pendulum is starting to swing. The second question is, what do educators do with this? And I think you're spot on. Just introducing technology, BYOD, one-to-one, whatever it is, doesn't mean you're now shifting the learning model to really put each student at the center and help them figure out, what do they need to do to excel. You can just be delivering a lecture with online technology and have people simply polling, right? And basic responses, well, some of you got it wrong, too bad, we're moving on. We need to flip the mindset, I think, of educators to help them realize you may not be delivering the same lesson to every kid in the classroom tomorrow, but that's okay. Instead, you're going to be able to spend individual time in small groups, time in projects, with each child figuring out where are they and where do they need to go so that they can realize their fullest opportunity. That's a pretty big mindset shift.
Yeah, it's very interesting because, yesterday I went to the post office and this guy who's running for mayor, he walked up to me, and I gave him this little sheet of the things he believes in. And I'm looking at these things and I'm going, really? And so I'm like, oh, okay. And then we get into discussion and I'm telling him like, look, dude, because we take NWA and many other states take NWA, even though it still is a normative assessment in terms of where this student is compared to others who've taken the test. But you still are able to sort of get a snapshot of, this is where this student's RIT score is. And so as I was talking to him about that, I was like, we as a district or other districts may look at those numbers, but states don't. So if a kid, you see a kid in August and they have a 180, and then in January, they have a 200, and then in April, they have 240. No one gets credit for that. The state doesn't say, man, you've really grown that kid. They just want to see that end of the year assessment. And if that student does not meet that sort of cut score, then that school and that teacher is penalized for that. And I'm thinking like, this is ridiculous because the kid is, the kid has shown growth.
Yeah, that's right.
The kid is learning. So on that side, I don't get, that piece of we're not celebrating what the student has learned. We're not celebrating how far they've come and where they could potentially go.
Yeah, I 1,000% agree. And I think it's crazy, just to take it out of numbers for a second, say a quote unquote 5th grade student comes in reading at a 2nd grade level, you're able to bring that kid up to what we consider a 4th grade level. Holy cow, that is success. And yet you take the 5th grade exam at the end and you, the teacher, you, the student, look like a failure. That literally makes no sense at all. That kid just grew 2 years. That's amazing. We should be celebrating and dancing from rooftops. I think that's the fundamental thing in policy that we gotta fix right now. That and a seat time mentality where, you know, progress is determined by the number of minutes you sit in the seat as opposed to how much you learn. That's fundamentally what we have to break right now. And it's insane to be governing and holding back educators based on that right now. I totally agree. And I think the more and more, like you said, NWEA is a step forward. It still compares to other students as opposed to looking at absolute growth of a child. But it's a step forward. We need to be showing more and more tools like that so people can say, there's a better way to do this. We don't need the assembly line assessment inspection, you know, essentially an autopsy right now. We can be doing this constantly and helping educators adjust practice accordingly.
Awesome, awesome. So let's jump into blended learning.
Yeah.
What positive outcomes have you seen, and what are some of the issues associated with introducing an online component into the classroom?
Yeah, so I think we're seeing a lot of positive outcomes from blended learning. Teachers getting to know their students better, getting to work in smaller groups, one-to-one, much more personalized learning for where a student is in their own trajectory and what they need. The possibility, I won't say guarantee, but the possibility of instilling a growth mindset in students, helping them build persistence and grit because they don't get to move on unless they truly master something. So there's a lot of benefits we're starting to see around that. And the evidence around personalizing learning, you know, having a tutor, are huge. We know that. And so blended learning is starting to realize that promise. And we're seeing some great, you know, even by the old measures, some great results along traditional test score measures and so forth start to show themselves that I hope will start to wake people up and say, hey, when they want to use another measure, that's not dumbing it down. It's actually just giving us a much fuller picture of what the kid and teacher is doing. So I think we're starting to see the results. It's not uniform. That's the first thing I will say. Blended learning is not a magic elixir. You know, flip your classroom, station rotation, whatever it is, and boom, magic happens. It takes work. It takes work from teachers. You got to figure out the systems that make sense for your kids. You got to figure out the spread of your kids, and it could be pretty far in some cases and wide. That can be a lot of work to all of a sudden trying to be personalized for all those different circumstances. No question about it. Second thing is, I would say the fear, and it's probably something you want to talk about more about as my guest, but, you know, introducing blended learning isn't saying like technology is now the teacher, goodbye teacher. That's crazy. And I think that's the other big risk, which is you sort of go into certain places where they've implemented blended learning. It's kind of like Night of the Living Dead. Kids just clicking away mindlessly on a computer program, very little active learning or feedback, sort of spreading motions, and teacher says, I've been replaced, sitting in the back of the classroom filing his or her nails or something like that. That isn't the purpose of this, but it definitely happens some cases. And I will tell you, the moment you walk in, if you see a teacher laying back and not actively involved in walking around and working with students, you know immediately it's not going to be a good blended learning example. You can just look at it and immediately know.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've heard about I've had the fear because I had a teacher walk up to me in the mall right before we went full on with our one-to-one rollout at the middle school, and she said, "Are y'all trying to replace us?" And I said, "No, you know, we're trying to bring an experience to students unlike they've ever had before." And you know, when I speak to teachers about this, and I'm thinking, okay, how many times have you ever taught something, and you said, "Who understands something?" Yeah. Raise your hand. You know, how many kids are going to raise their hand and leave their hands down and like, no, I don't understand. I don't understand. But, you know, if with certain tools like Nearpod, for example, where you can get that immediate feedback of, okay, now I understand. Okay, they get it or they don't get it. And then now you can use that to go back and reteach. You know what you need to remediate immediately. And so I try to tell teachers, you know, let's look at these tools to help you better teach, as well as giving students more ownership in their part of the learning.
Totally agree. I think that's exactly right. And it does, you know, it's doing two or three key things, right? One, it's giving you far more transparency as a teacher to understand real time where are your students, who got it, who needs more assistance, whatever it is, right? Way more transparency and information. And you know what? If you don't fully trust the assessment from the technology, that's fine. It's just an indicator to help give you more sense behind your intuition, right? That's all positive. Second, as a teacher, let's go to another profession. There's no way a lawyer practicing today would say, I'm not going to use technology that helps me research court cases faster to figure out how this judge is going to decide something, or to marshal arguments to win this case for my client. You would use the tools at your disposal. And just to think that teachers don't want these tools, I don't think is right, but we have to frame it that it's tools to empower and enhance your ability to reach every single learner. I heard a great phrase from Tim Ferriss recently where he said, technology is a terrific tool, it's a terrible master. I think that's how we got to frame this as we move into education. And then the last thing I think is, a lot of teachers want to spend more time with students on rich application of knowledge. They don't just want to be in the information transfer, performance business, right? But they don't have time. And it turns out that knowledge really matters before you can do the higher level application of that knowledge. All of a sudden you can say, hey, the technology can help do some of that, which frees me up to practice to the top of my craft. How exciting is that? I think it's an unbelievable win for teachers when they start to embrace and really unleash the power of what they've learned.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And it's very interesting because even when you start to get there, Catelyn Tucker did a blog post about how they're changing that dynamic. Some of her kids stepped up and some didn't because, they just didn't want to put in the work. Yeah. And even, with some of my teachers, they complained that when I gave them the ownership and, I expected more, I wanted them to do more. The students were so used to being sort of spoon-fed, worksheet, or I'm going to lecture all day, that the paradigm shift for them was jarring and they didn't know what to do. Or they were like, hey, man, this is just too much work, as opposed to them sort of taking on the challenge of this new learning environment.
Totally. I think it's a really important point because there's another sort of belief out there, I guess, that students are digital natives, just give them the technology, they'll know how to do it and run, you relax. Not the experience I think either of us have had at all. Some students, yes, that's true. They're ready to be active learners and jump in and engage. But doing blended learning right meaning, you're going to do it in a competency-based environment, really personalized for every single student. That's going to take a lot more work from a student. They can't just sit back passively, let the teacher lecture at them, and then come back the next day and they're on to the next unit. They have to work at it. And it's my belief that, a lot of people are talking about the building up of growth mindset and grit, perseverance, things, agency, things like that in kids. I don't think we can do that in the traditional system because fundamentally, like you said, you're lecturing, kids passively sitting there. It doesn't matter how much work they do. Tomorrow when they come, they're going to be doing something else because you've changed activity. It doesn't matter how much work they put in. Systematically, we can talk about growth mindset, grit, perseverance, etc. But if that kid doesn't have to do work, then the system is telling him every single day, unambiguously, doesn't matter what you do, you'll make progress. Flip that to a system in which they got to lean in. They got to do the work. Otherwise, they don't move forward. They don't make progress. All of a sudden, we're saying, hey, you control your destiny. When you work, you can grow. You can do it. You don't make progress unless you put in the work. That means you're going to fail sometimes and you're going to have to get back at it. That's grit, perseverance. I don't think we put those skills in or build those skills in students unless we switch to a paradigm where they have to lean in. But what that means is that you can't just introduce the technology and say, now we're doing it. You have to be very intentional about building culture so that students know what to do, know the processes, know the expectations, know the habits that are expected of them so that when you start to unleash them, they can run and aren't sitting there saying, well, wait a second, this is different from my last school. I don't know what to do. I just want to hang out, right? You really have to, you can't leave that to chance. You got to be intentional about shaping that culture with your kids.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons why when I work with teachers, particularly in the beginning, I tell them the importance of creating the routine.
Yeah.
So that your students know, I walk through the door, this is what's happening today, and where we can use tools like Schoology to even send the messages beforehand. Look, today we're getting class, we're going to be doing this and this, this group will be going to this station, or as a class we'll be doing this, blah 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 blah, to get them sort of accustomed to how things are going to be going. And even as a teacher, mentally, for you to make that shift of letting go, because some teachers, I've worked with, and they hold on so tightly to the old stuff. I even had a teacher once tell me she missed the blackboard, and I was like, wow. I'm like, wow. So with all of these things, it's been a very interesting ride for me in working with teachers throughout this process. So what is the potential? And I love online learning. That's my thing right there. But what is the potential for online learning in K through 12 education? And how can teachers create an online learning experience that goes beyond the canned curriculum from a digital textbook?
Yeah, I think this is something that I think teachers are increasingly, as they move into blended environments, are really voicing their beliefs and disgust in some cases with certain curriculum that's very canned and feels like, wait, you just put the worksheet online and you don't give me the chance to personalize, et cetera, right? So I think the opportunity is, if you can think about, yes, there will be some times where we need to drill and kill something because that's how you memorize and build automaticity, but it'll be personalized for you based on some adaptivity that'll help you. And then the teacher can take that and say, hey, now we're going to do a really exciting project, and we're going to use the online tools to create something that allows you to go beyond what you otherwise would have thought you could have done. So you're taking the knowledge, intentionally using it to do something more exciting, and as the teacher, creating really an arc of why you should care about this and why it's going to be exciting, so that as you're doing the knowledge building and then the application and critical thinking, evaluation, et cetera, you are instilled with this higher purpose and sense of what you're doing. I think from that perspective, again, the online curriculum, it's ultimately a tool, and you're probably going to use several different curricula, patching them together as meets your set of experiences that you want to provide for a student. There's no curriculum that has it all, at least not today, which I'm aware. You look at math teachers, they're using ST Math to help build conceptual understanding in students. Then they're using Zern to help build the knowledge and the foundation. And then they're setting up their own project, or they're maybe jumping up on Twitter with other educators and coming up with ideas for how to apply that in pretty exciting ways. And they might be using something like Project Foundry to do project-based learning within that, right? So all of a sudden, there's a huge set of tools that they're bringing at their disposal to help create this mosaic of an experience that really matches the set of experiences they want students to have to build mastery and fluency to be successful.
Oh yeah, and I'm glad you just brought up the need of creating a workflow, because that's one of the things that teachers have had issues with. Of okay, I have Nearpod, I have Schoology, we're a Google Lab school where we have this Pearson stuff. How do I put all together in a way that not only makes sense for me in lesson planning, but provides a well-rounded, more effective, enriching experience for my students as well?
Yeah, I think that's right. And you as a teacher, you're kind of the architect, right, of that experience. And ideally with a set of teachers and in a school with an instructional leader that helps you think through that arc. And ideally, I think we're starting to see it, more and more curriculum providers are both thinking, what is that arc? How do we fit in? How are we a piece as opposed to the whole? And where they're trying to be the whole, understanding that they may be that teachers are still going to bring in tools from the outside, and so that you have to figure out a way for these different parts to work together. And it's not going to be just one thing, that's it, see it done. But make that more and more accessible to teachers. I think that's sort of the transition and revolution we're living through right now. And it's going to be messy for a few more years, right? These tools don't always talk together very well. Sometimes the providers don't want them to talk to each other very well because it'll screw up their secret sauce behind their particular tool. So I think that's fine. That's where they'll be. Teachers will vote with their feet and start using tools that do talk to each other. And I think you're going to see an evolution over the next several years to less black box sort of providers where not sure what's going on inside, but really make these things transparent to both learner and teacher. And by the way, and maybe parents as well. I think you'll see more and more fluidity, not just in the classroom environment, but just in a student's day everywhere.
Cool. So how can blended learning be used to, because we've, this has been sort of a recurring theme we've been talking about, but how can blended learning be used to customize learning for students? And how can teachers make sure that the computer doesn't become a $300 worksheet?
Yeah. So maybe it's worth thinking through one individual student and their arc, or thinking through a school that's done this really thoughtfully, like Summit Learning or Summit Schools in California, which is now making their curriculum and platform free to anyone, anywhere through Summit Learning. Essentially, students going to come in, right? They're going to have a playlist, a set of activities or concepts that they have to learn. And within each concept, they're going to actually have choice of how to learn it. And they're going to be making those decisions. And teachers, while students are doing that, are roaming around, looking at the data, feedback from it, and then helping jump in, tutor a student who's struggling with it. Maybe one student says, like, I'm pretty far ahead in math right now, but I'm further behind in foreign language or English language arts, social studies, whatever it might be. I'm going to drill down in there and really spend some time for the next couple of days on that during my personalized learning time. And then the teacher is going to say, and now we've got some dedicated project time, project in the last 6, 7, 8 weeks, who knows, where you're really going to be taking these competencies that you're building in the online curriculum and apply them in really impactful ways. And that could be through written product. It could be through projects that are going to go deep into a set of concepts. Ideally, it's interdisciplinary projects, right? Where it's bringing in competencies from a range of the knowledge domains that you're building, so you can see how these things apply in different contexts and build learning transfer, the ability to take something you've learned and put it into another context and use it for good for what you're trying to achieve. So it's really being thoughtful about that experience. Now, while the student is learning math, they might be sitting in on Khan Academy answering a bunch of questions to prove that they have mastery. That may be sort of like a worksheet, but what's different from the worksheet is that it's dynamic. Student shows that they've already mastered this material. You don't have to do 100 problems, right? Because the teacher said that's what homework was. Once you show mastery, you move on. And that's really the key that I would be looking for is whatever program you're using, there's certain times where worksheet-like activities make sense, but not arbitrarily and not for their own sake. Make sure that it's giving you the ability to say, this, move on, do something else, enrich yourself in some other way, right? I think sometimes the reason kids hate worksheets so much is 100 problems of multiplication. Once I show mastery after 10, 15, if they take me each, a few seconds to do, I kind of have shown mastery of this. Why do I have to do 100? No question reps help you in certain parts, but once you've mastered it, then you're not really focusing on the next best thing for that kid.
Awesome. So now this is where this question is one of the things where when you have, my job, you start to begin to think of, all right, how do I build capacity and teachers, get them to become of their own practice, as well as sort of seeing like all of this is floating around and kind of narrow it down to some sort of digestible nugget that they themselves can work from. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about the roles of the teacher and the student. And because once you, and I don't care what anyone says, but once you give a teacher 30 Chromebooks in his or her classroom, that dynamic is done. That old thing that you used to do, that is done for, particularly if you are expected to use this technology. So now the game has changed. So please explain the teacher's role, the student's role, and how sort of have they changed in this new blended learning environment?
Yeah, so there's two questions I think in there, right? One is, how do you help teachers build that capacity? And then second, what are the actual roles? So let's maybe start with the first and then jump into the second of how the roles change. So in the first, from my perspective, the first thing to do is to really inspire and excite teachers about the shift. Show them examples of other teachers that have made it, make it real, and don't just show them one model, show them a few different models to help them think through, what's right for my student. First, inspire. Second is then more deliberately building capacity. And what I would say is, don't jump into the deep end of the pool. It might be this year, you're just gonna quote unquote flip your classroom, right? Students are gonna watch videos online. You're not gonna do a full school lesson plan. When you come in, you're going to be working on projects and help troubleshoot where students are having struggles and whatever else. Just as an example, that creates a gateway drug to blended learning, or to much deeper personalization, if you will, right? Because all of a sudden the teacher's going to start asking questions. Wait a second, Johnny didn't seem to have any problem on that assignment last night and already seemed to understand the material. But Liza over there, she's got a little bit more work to do on this. Why am I going to have them watch the same video tonight? All of a sudden you start asking questions and you start saying, maybe we ought to be doing different things for different kids. And it starts to bring you to a different place. You're capable to understand the practices you need to be effective over time. So that's sort of how I would think about it, is go slow to go fast, right? Don't go fast out of the gate. Second thing I would say then, in terms of roles, there's a lot of different ways to imagine it. Some of the coolest schools that I see, they knock down the walls between classrooms, and one teacher who loves to work individually with students and tutor gets to do that. Another teacher who loves to geek out on data and figure out what students should be doing next, does that. Another teacher is designing really rich projects in collaboration with students and helping manage those and find resources and things like that. That's one vision of specialization. That's not going to appeal to everyone. Some teachers, I think, they still want to be, they still want to be a bit of a performer. So you got to think about something that works for them, right? And so from my perspective, what I would do is think of this as a design process. And this is what we wrote about in the book Blended, using disruptive innovation to improve schools, is really start with, what problem are you trying to solve and what does success look like? What's the team of people you need around you to solve it? And then spend a lot of time thinking about, what is that student experience? What do you want it to look like? Don't even think about software or particular programs or technology. Just literally go through the arc of a day, a week, figure out what you want a student's experience to look like. And then start to think about, what do I want the teacher experience to look like mapped against that? And how do I get teachers to be excited about the profession and motivated to be here and inspiring students and connecting with them and unleashing learning opportunities that they never otherwise would have expected to have in a school? And you can start thinking about that. And so it's really hard to say, I guess my statement would be, just as there's no one size fits all way to educate a kid, there's no one size fits all way to have a teacher in this new world. And we ought to be celebrating a plurality of models, so long as it's helping empower students to fulfill their potential.
Awesome. This has been, I'm digging this. I'm like, okay, I'm geeking over here. I got Michael Horn, and he's dropping the knowledge. So before we go, because I've seen you do all these talks on YouTube, the Jamie Cassup, and other things. Before we go, where do you see K through 12 education going within the next 5 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. Within the next 5 years, I think is tricky. I think blended learning is going to be relatively ubiquitous in the next 5 years. Like, everywhere is going to be doing it. I think that quality of blended learning is going to be pretty uneven. Some places are going to be really using it to personalize, thoughtfully build knowledge in kids, create rich project opportunities, etc. Some places will be doing it more in the worksheet online digitization of the factory model, not what we want to see ultimately. So I think we're going to see uneven quality, and I think we ought to be honest with that. However, the introduction of blended learning is going to create some pretty exciting opportunities, and I think the trajectory that we should go down is to start to think of schools really as community centers, where you can say, hey, the raw academic instruction, we can do that online. The opportunity of bringing these kids together with teachers and other professionals is to have them work hands-on in projects with each other, connect that to the community, connect that to social capital, so mentors, people in the community with different professions that you would never otherwise be exposed to. And maybe one kid, like their family circumstance means that they got to be at school from 8 to 8 to help their parents make a living and so forth. And another kid, actually 10 to 2 is great. We ought to start to move toward a more flexible and fluid school building, as long as we're seeing that progress in each and every single student. And really, it's a transition to, I think, a community center model where the school is able to marshal the resources it needs to customize or personalize for each kid's needs and help them fulfill their potential. I'll tell one last story because it's personal, but I didn't know what an engineer was until like junior or senior year of college, maybe even after I graduated college. I grew up in Washington, D.C. area. Everyone around me was lawyers and doctors and politicians. I just had no exposure to the concept of engineer, so I didn't know it existed. Unless you get exposure to people like that, you're just not going to know the range of possibilities and inspirations that you could have. And so I think my colleague, Julia Freeland Fisher of the Christensen Institute, who took over for me as director, is doing her research right now around social capital. And I think it's going to be the most important thing we start to think about, is not just how to build the academic mindsets, but how to help connect people to other people that can support them and inspire them, so that they get great networks that will help them throughout life. And I think school can do that.
Awesome. And I love that. I've written about this, and I've spoken to people saying, when they talk about the academic gap, and I tell them, well, I don't believe in the academic gap. I believe in the hope gap.
Yes.
Because, it's particularly, if you are, let's say a poorer student or a student, I'll just say poor student, because you can, there are Black people with money out there. But, if you are a poor student and in your areas, you only see certain, as you mentioned earlier, only certain type of careers. You only see a certain type of family structure, community structure, certain things. You don't see that as being a possibility for you.
That's right.
And when you are able to have exposure to certain careers, individuals, learning experiences, and then in certain cases, whether you be a female or a person of color, now you start seeing these people actually look like you.
Yep.
Now it starts to go, if they can do it, I can do it.
That's right.
And that switches things, because the intrinsic motivation steps in, and what you call as a academic gap make up for it, because now they have a purpose behind their reason for being there.
Yeah, 100% right. Agree completely. And I remember my little brother mentoring program that I did in Boston. He lived in Charlestown, bounced around families. I would say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he would tell me, and he said, and it makes $12 an hour. And I said, look, I'm listening to your talent. I'm listening to what you bring. Let me show you some other things that you could be, because you can be a lot, right? And then it's having people around those people to not just inspire, but then help connect them to the opportunities to show them how you get there. And if we narrowly think it's just an academic gap, we're going to short sell ourselves and not realize the potential of what we have before us right now, which is to radically alter the trajectories of lives. And we got to do it right.
Awesome. Thanks again.
Thank you,
Dr. Horn, for being a guest on my show. Y'all, you understand, I'm off for the summer. I'm chilling, doing my podcast shows. And I just reached out to Michael on Twitter. And I said, hey, you want to get to my show? And he's like, yes. And I was like, what? You know, because I always tell people, I'm just a man with a hangout. So when people say yes, I'm always surprised. So people, you know how I do around here. This is going up on my YouTube channel immediately. Please subscribe. I'm going to pop this on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. And then in a few days, after this sort of hangs out on YouTube bit, this is going up on my blog. And then the audio version will be going up on SoundCloud as well for those of you who have a commute. And, you know, you can get your knowledge during that time. So as always, people, invest in you, EDU, peace.